Hello. Welcome to the first of Decem-Baron 2020. And I thought I'd start things off with just sharing, my beginnings in Dungeons & Dragons. The intro for this series was scripted to keep my delivery concise, but I don't have a script at this point. I'm just going off of a general outline in my head, so forgive me if things are a bit rambly from here on out. I'm sure that's fine, right? I mean, we're just here having a nice time, enjoying some nice winter beverages and so forth. Alright, so how did I get started in Dungeons & Dragons? Oh boy. Well, it was actually 5 years ago that I started learning about Dungeons & Dragons. Before this point, especially during high school, I had first heard of Dungeons & Dragons when I was in high school, and I basically had heard nothing except the stupid stereotypes, right? The whole thing about, a bunch of guys sitting in, some parent's basement or something like that, pushing their glasses up their nose, that kind of thing, and talking about how they're a level 15 elf wizard and all that stuff. It wasn't for me. When I was a kid, I was a lot more into theater and music and things like that. I still am now. I'm not saying at all that they're mutually exclusive. I'm just saying that I didn't really understand and appreciate what Dungeons & Dragons really was until 5 years ago, when I was in college. I was in an internship at the time, and I had made some good friends, and we had bonded over board games. We played all kinds of board games, Seven Wonders, Ticket to Ride. Did we play Monopoly at one point? Can't remember. But yeah, lots of good board games, and I started getting more and more into board games and card games and that kind of thing. And then one day, this friend, we'll call him Richard. Richard brought up Dungeons & Dragons a few times, and I had mentioned that I didn't really know much about it. And so he explained what it was, and I got rather excited about it. I realized that it was about that point that I realized that Dungeons & Dragons was, it combined just about everything I loved. It combined tabletop games, like board games. It combined voice acting. It combined creating worlds, creating characters for that world. It combined fantasy, even sci-fi if you want it, a little bit. It had everything. It seemed to be the perfect creative outlet that I have always wanted, but didn't know I always wanted, And at the time, my birthday was coming up, and so I will admit he did do something that was technically not right according to copyright laws, but I've made it right since then. Essentially, he shared with me PDF scans of his Dungeons & Dragons books, the Player's Handbook, the Monster Manual, and the Dungeon Master's Guide, because he didn't have the books with him, and he wanted me to be able to look at them in my own time. And so, so he shared with me those PDF files, and I looked at them. And I have, of course, since purchased those books physically. So I have them. For example, I think right now, do I have all of them right now? Right here? Maybe not. But, I've definitely, the Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual. Oh, yeah, and the Player's Handbook. These 3 books were what my friend Richard shared with me in electronic format. And so, I was excited to look into this, and there was a time when I had a lot of free time, even though I was doing an internship at the time. It was also around the time that I got sick with a cold or flu or whatever, a seasonal thing. So I pretty much stayed in my room in bed for several days in a row. So that gave me a lot of time just to look over this kind of stuff. Everything just kind of worked. So yeah, we yeah, started going through the player's handbook. I started with the preface and the introduction, reading over it, kind of seeing their example of a dungeon master with a Philip and an Amy playing and everything. Worlds of adventure using the book, what D20 means, 20-sided dice. And then I got into creating a character. I love the illustrations. I was going over it and kind of thinking, okay, I could do this. And then going over, the different races and the different classes and things like that. And I didn't have the opportunity to play Dungeons and Dragons while I was on my internship, but I could create characters, and I did. I created 3 characters. I created just like a threesome of people that would characters that would go well together. 2 of them I have not used, but one of them ended up being something which I'll talk about more in a later story. But so I made a dwarf warrior. I forgot what the warrior's name is now. I probably still have that character sheet out there somewhere. I'm not sure. But a dwarf warrior who just was crazy for combat. Just like got excited every time he gets to like whack people with his hammer and his shield and everything. Another character I made was a tiefling. If you don't know what a tiefling is, basically there's someone who has devilish ancestry. They have usually reddish, pinkish skin with a tail and horns. But yeah, they have infernal or devilish ancestry. That doesn't mean they're evil. Some of them are good. Some are evil, just like humans. But that's kind of their in their bloodline. So I made a tiefling monk. A monk being like someone who can, I guess martial arts is a way to put it if you want to put it that way. I do remember the name of that tiefling. Tieflings usually give themselves like names of ideas or concepts. So I named him Truth. He's just sticking with the truth about himself and sort of like rejecting the evil of his ancestry, and that who he is his truth essentially. However, the very first character I ever made was a Dragonborn. I was fascinated by Dragonborns. Just basically these shaped and sized creatures that had draconic ancestry of some kind. And I made a Dragonborn bard, a silver Dragonborn bard who could breathe cold air. But I made him a librarian, and I called him Yarharit Tintinabular. And I basically made him me. Let's be real. The very first character I ever made, Yarharit Tintinabular, was me in the fantasy form. And then I made Truth and the dwarf after that. So I had these 3 characters, and I imagined really cool like adventures for them and things like that. But yeah, I ate this stuff up for days and days. Not just the player's handbook either. I would go through, the Dungeon Master's Guide and all the different things, and especially all of the crazy magic items. Like, just look at these beautiful illustrations of all these crazy, like, magic items that, that you can have in your campaign. Of course, you can make up your own magic items as well. The Dungeon Master can and stuff. But this is just, like, a lot of just amazing ideas and and artifacts and things like that. And so spent a lot of time looking through that, and then of course you have every player's favorite book when a dungeon master brings out the monster manual. All kinds of just crazy creatures, and they're the tan boxes are stat blocks, basically the mechanical, like the numbers that dungeon masters use to be able to run the creatures and everything. So just all kinds of fascinating things. That was how I began my Dungeons and Dragons journey. Now over 5 years. Again, I wasn't able to play any Dungeons and Dragons games for a while, for several months. But what I was able to do was look through all that material, and just like spend a lot of time online in my free time. And also, I wanted to at least experience how Dungeons and Dragons was played, and so I looked around for. You can find a lot of Dungeons and Dragons games on YouTube and stuff, which is but all of them, most of them seem to have such long sessions, right? I've come to accept that, but at the time, an hour, like a 1 or 2 hour, or even 3 hour, or goodness forbid, 4 hour long video, seemed like too much. So I was able to find one series, and also a family friendly series, because I was trying to avoid like too much like swearing and stuff like that. That's just me personally, my own personal preferences. I came across a group called the Heroes of Awesome, and they were doing a campaign. They had done a campaign called A Study in Scarlet. I don't think I've ever finished watching that series. Like I kind of like moved on to other series and other things like after watching many dozens of their videos. But their first few videos were only about a half hour long or something, which I thought, okay, yeah, this is great. They were cool edited videos, and they these friends that played with a dungeon master in a board game shop, and yeah, it was just very entertaining to watch them play. I think they started with 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons, but then got into 5th edition later on. That was fun. I was just watching just for fun. But yeah, I spent a long time, especially when I was sick, just sitting in front of my computer, watching Heroes of Awesome. Sorry, not Study in Scarlet, a War in Scarlet. Sorry, Study in Scarlet is the Sherlock story, the Sherlock Holmes short story. A War in Scarlet, that's what it was called. But yeah, I watched a lot of A War in Scarlet, and I got really invested into the characters at the time, and just I think like especially when I started being a dungeon master myself, I picked up a lot of cues from that dungeon master on how to run things, how to get players engaged. One little quirk that I picked up on was having players describe the killing blow for a monster, which I don't do all the time anymore, but especially for like a boss, I let them describe how, usually describe how a big like boss monster or something, dies from the killing blow or is subdued somehow. But yeah, I still very much remember one of my favorite early moments of A War in Scarlet is this dungeon where the characters found a bunch of and they had tiles too. It was pretty cool. The characters found a bunch of like statues that seemed to have like parts carved out of them, and they were finding body parts elsewhere in the dungeon, and the body parts fit into the holes in the statues. And that was like a bunch of like puzzly things, and there were puzzles involved in getting each body part as well. And there's a time when like the rogue cheated at tricked a cheater at cards, hustled a hustler essentially. Lots of really cool stuff in that sort of like little arc or episode, I suppose, or a bit of episodes. So yeah. I'm very grateful to Richard for explaining to me that what Dungeons and Dragons really is, allowing me to finally see the light, basically. But yeah, that was my first exposure to Dungeons and Dragons, and that's how I really got into it. And like I said, my first time playing Dungeons and Dragons wouldn't happen for several months afterwards. But we'll get into that. It's a rather fun story. But I think that's all I have to say for my beginnings in Dungeons and Dragons. And I look forward to sharing more in later days in Decem-Baron 2020. Thank you very much.